Hi, my name's Alex, and today is a Microbial Monday. So like, subscribe, and let's dive in. Let's go viral. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Now, Juliet did have a point here. The names that she's talking about, the Capulets and the Montagues, those were families involved in a blood feud that prevented her from associating with her beloved Romeo. Those names caused a lot of grief. But there is another side to this whole story about names, and it seems that perhaps Juliet never studied biology. Because biologists love naming things, and they especially like to give names that represent some information, whether that be structure or function or the way of life of the organisms which hold those names. To kick us off, I've actually found a counter quotation for Juliet, a response from biologist Lynn J. Rothschild. Rothschild says, "A rose may smell like a rose," but Juliet missed the point. The utility of taxonomic nomenclature lies in the wealth of biological information that it conveys. So what Rothschild is saying is that names are important. They give us a first step towards the understanding of the organisms, which, well, somebody else has named. To understand this, I would like to introduce you to the tree of life, as a way for thinking about the microbes that I'll be talking about in the future of this channel. So let's take a look at the tree of life. It's tattooed on my back. As you can see here, the tree of life splits off into three main branches. We have prokarya, eukarya, and archaea. And those names indeed give clues about the organisms that those branches represent. So let's start with prokarya. Their name literally means before the nucleus, prokarya. And what is the nucleus? Well, that's an additional structural complexity that some cells have, and others, the prokaryotes, do not. The nucleus is a kind of control center which contains DNA in cells that do have a nucleus. And prokaryotes, the DNA isn't quite as distinct from the rest of the cell. It is wrapped up in a way that makes it organized, but it's just a little bit structurally less complex than cells that do have a nucleus. And the cells that do have a nucleus, well, their name hints to that as well. That's the eukarya, which means true nucleus. And the eukaryotic branch on the tree of life, that includes everything from us, humans, all the way down to single-celled yeasts, for example. So within these two branches, there are several different types of microbes. So the prokarya, that includes bacteria, which is maybe a more familiar name for these little guys. If we go back to the tree of life, all these different branches along the prokaryotic branch represent different types of bacteria that have different roles, different functions, and different life strategies. Then we have eukarya. Indeed, that includes us. It includes fungi like yeasts and mushrooms. And it also includes helminths, for example, microscopic worms like tapeworms, which would also be considered microbes. Protists also lie on the eukaryotic branch of the tree of life. Protists are kind of weird ones. It's quite a broad category that I've often seen referred to as just any eukaryote that's not plants, not fungi, and not animals. It's a pretty broad category, but it is a useful one. And I'll get into that in future videos. You can also check out some of the blog articles on microbialmondays.com if you want to learn more about protists. But we're still missing one branch on the tree of life, archaea. Their name also gives a clue into how we can think about them. We actually used to think that archaea were a type of bacteria. They used to be represented by a branch on the prokaryotic part of the tree of life. And they actually used to be called archaebacteria. Archaic or old bacteria. So basically we thought that archaea were a type of bacteria that was just really, really old, ancient. And this was partially based on how they live. Archaea often live in very extreme environments and eat kind of weird things. And biologists thought maybe this represented a fact that archaea would have evolved at a very ancient time when environments were really extreme. As we learn more about archaea, we realized that actually there are quite a few differences that separate them from bacteria. And to account for this, we moved their branch on the tree of life. And we stopped calling them archaeobacteria. Now they're archaea. So as new information comes out about the different organisms on the tree of life, We have to be flexible and be able to move them along to a more accurate place. And actually, the Montagues and Capulets perhaps could have learned from that. They could have learned from us biologists. So what I'm trying to say is that the beauty of taxonomy is that it helps us understand the differences and similarities across these huge swaths of living things. And I haven't even gotten into the non-living microbes, which include viruses and prions, for example. The names of microbes and other organisms all across the planet, those convey, as Lynn J. Rothschild said, a wealth of biological information. And they give us some shortcuts into understanding them if you know the right places to look, and perhaps a little bit of Greek. But nonetheless, Juliet did have a point in that we have to adapt. Taxonomy must be flexible. And as we learn more about Montagues or Capulets or ARCHAEA or bacteria, we have to be able to reflect our increased understanding in the way that we draw the tree of life. Maybe I should have thought about that before getting it tattooed on my back, but it's there now. What's in a name? Information, history, a story about ways of life, a story about discovery of these microbes, and also hopefully impermanence is in a name. Because as another favorite writer of mine once said, it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so.